The crowd thought Shadow was overreacting to an ordinary suitcase. But when the zipper opened, the truth inside was darker than any explosive. The Oakridge train station was alive, with sound and movement, the kind of restless energy that seemed to live in every echo of the place. Suitcases rolled across the tiled floor, shoes clicked against the concrete, voices rose and fell in dozens of conversations layered over one another. Trains hissed as they slowed at platforms, conductors shouted for passengers to board, and the smell of coffee and engine oil drifted through the air. Officer Dana Cruz walked with purpose through the crowd, her hand resting lightly on the leash of her partner, a black German shepherd named Shadow. His fur was streaked with scars from years of work, his ears sharp, his amber eyes always searching. Shadow moved with a steady rhythm, his paws hitting the ground in perfect time with Dana's boots. He had been trained for this, trained to smell danger hidden in plain sight, trained to sense what no human could. He wove between travelers without hesitation, ignoring the tug of food smells or the shuffle of children's sneakers. But as they reached Platform 9, where a train bound for New Haven was preparing to depart, something in Shadow changed. He stopped so suddenly that Dana nearly stumbled. His body stiffened, muscles locked, his head lowered as his nose pulled toward a single suitcase resting by a worn marble pillar. His tail froze mid-swing, his ears tilted forward, and a low rumble built in his throat. Dana tightened her grip on the leash, scanning the crowd, her pulse jumping. "Easy, boy," she whispered, though her own voice carried no calm. She knew Shadow. She knew the difference between curiosity and warning, and this was no ordinary alert. He was rigid, hackles bristling, every inch of his body screaming danger. Travelers nearest to them began to notice. A woman pulling her son by the hand slowed, eyes darting toward the dog. A man with a newspaper lowered it, his gaze fixed on the black shepherd that had suddenly frozen the air around them. Whispers moved like a ripple through the crowd. The noise of the station didn't stop, but inside that circle it felt quieter, charged. "Suspicious bag at Platform 9, Dana called into her radio. Her voice clipped, urgent. Within seconds, uniformed officers moved toward her, weaving through startled passengers, and the first agents began to form a perimeter. But Shadow wasn't moving. He crept forward 2 steps, nose pressed low, pulling Dana with him. His growl deepened, a raw sound that silenced the chatter around them. Dana could see the whites of his eyes now, see the kind of tension that had kept her alive on more than one operation. "Get back," she ordered the crowd, raising her hand, and people obeyed, shuffling backward, eyes wide, breaths held. The suitcase sat untouched, plain and ordinary in its black fabric, but Shadow's reaction made it anything but harmless. Dana knelt slightly, her hand brushing over the scar along Shadow's shoulder, the one that told stories no words ever could. "What is it, boy?" she whispered. He didn't glance at her. His whole world was locked on that single piece of luggage, his nose flaring, his chest tight with a soundless warning. The platform doors closed on the waiting train, the whistle blew, but no one moved to board. All eyes were on the shepherd and the suitcase, and for the first time that day, the constant rush of Oakridge seemed to hold its breath. The growl that came from Shadow's throat was not just noise, it was the kind of sound that cut through chatter and laughter and left silence in its wake. People on the platform froze where they stood, children clutched closer to parents, and even the agents moving in slowed their steps. It was low, steady, and dangerous, the kind of growl that said something was wrong, something more than anyone wanted to believe. Dana's hand tightened on the leash, but she did not try to pull him back. She had worked with him too long, seen too many nights where his instincts saved them both. If Shadow was growling like that, it was because he knew. The bomb squad moved quickly, pulling heavy black cases behind them, their visors already down. One of them spoke in a clipped tone, telling everyone to stay calm, to keep back, to let them work. Dana felt the tension coil in her chest as the men approached, moving toward the suitcase, as if this was another routine call. But Shadow wasn't routine. He didn't give warnings without reason. He lunged forward, pawing at the suitcase with such force that Dana nearly lost her grip. His claws scraped fabric, his nose pressed tight against it, and the growl turned into sharp barks, desperate, almost frantic. "Hold him back!" one of the bomb squad members shouted, glancing at Dana as if her dog was getting in the way of procedure. But she shook her head, her voice cutting in hard. "He's telling us something. Let him be." They exchanged looks, half skeptical, half annoyed, but something in her tone made them pause. Shadow wasn't acting like he had with explosives before. Dana remembered the last time. A quiet sit, a steady posture, calm alertness. This was different. This was fear tangled with urgency, as if he knew that whatever was inside that case could not wait for slow hands or careful rules. She crouched down beside him, one hand brushing over his back, feeling the tension shiver through his body. "What is it, boy?" she whispered. His eyes flicked up at her for the briefest moment, and what she saw there made her throat tighten. It wasn't just instinct. It was recognition. He pawed again at the suitcase, nails tearing at the fabric, whining low, then snapping back into that furious growl. The crowd behind the tape was restless now, murmurs rolling like waves. Someone whispered the word bomb, and panic spread fast. But Dana didn't take her eyes off Shadow. She could see the way his chest heaved, the way his whole body was angled forward, as though he wanted to break the rules and tear the suitcase open himself. "Ma'am, step back," the squad leader ordered, raising a gloved hand. But Dana stood her ground. "No," she said firmly, her voice sharp enough to draw stares. "This isn't explosives. Look at him. He knows something else is inside." The men hesitated, caught between protocol and the raw, undeniable urgency of the dog that refused to yield. Shadow's growl deepened again, vibrating through the tiled floor and through Dana's bones, a warning that no one could ignore. The moment the suitcase was pulled toward the inspection table, the air on the platform seemed to thicken. People leaned over the barricade trying to catch a glimpse, but no one dared speak above a whisper. The bomb squad moved with caution, hands steady, movements precise, as they worked their tools against the zipper. Shadow's growl rumbled like distant thunder, filling the silence between every metallic click. Dana held her breath, her palm pressed to the leash so tight that her knuckles whitened. She knew whatever was inside this suitcase was not going to be ordinary, and she could feel the truth of it in the way her partner trembled at her side. The zipper gave way at last, the sound harsh in the quiet station, and the flap was pulled back. For a heartbeat, everyone expected wires or metal, something heavy with danger, but what they saw instead made confusion ripple through the room. Inside, nestled in old blankets, was a doll. Its glass eyes were broken, one hanging loose, the other cracked down the center. The porcelain face was smeared with dirt, and its small chest had been crudely cut open, leaving a cavity that was filled not with stuffing, but with folded photographs, crumpled documents, and a single burner phone. The squad leader froze, his gloved hands suspended above the doll, as if he wasn't sure whether to touch it. Agents behind him muttered under their breath, disbelief heavy in every word. Dana felt her stomach drop. Something about the broken doll looked wrong, like it wasn't meant to be a toy anymore, but a container, a messenger carrying secrets no one wanted discovered. Shadow moved before she could stop him, pressing his nose deep into the open suitcase. He ignored the doll itself, focusing on the papers and photos buried in its hollow chest. His body shivered as he inhaled sharply, then he whined low and long, a sound that broke through the stillness of the crowd. Dana knelt beside him, reaching into the case and pulling out the first photograph, her fingers trembling. The image was faded but clear enough. A group of children stood in a dark room, their faces pale, their eyes wide with fear. Behind them, a concrete wall slick with dampness. Dana turned it over, another photograph. This one, a single boy staring straight at the camera, a number scrawled in marker across his shirt. Her throat closed as she realized these were not just random pictures. These were victims cataloged, documented, and hidden inside a doll's chest like some kind of grotesque message. The burner phone buzzed once in her hand, startling several officers. The sound was sharp against the hush of the platform. She didn't answer, not yet. Shadow whined again, pawing at the other papers until more spilled out: financial records, maps scribbled with notes, names that meant nothing to most, but everything to those who understood the language of crime. Dana felt eyes on her as she sifted through them, but her focus stayed on her dog. Shadow's nose brushed one of the photos, his whine deepening, like recognition echoing through his body. For the first time, Dana felt true fear twist inside her chest. This was not about explosives, not about drugs. It was about people, and Shadow knew it. The photographs spread across the inspection table like shards of truth no one wanted to touch. Dana lifted another one, her hand unsteady and her breath caught. The face staring back was unmistakable. Thomas Blackwood, the man whose smile had once been plastered across charity billboards, the man who had shaken hands with senators and held crying children for cameras, was staring back at them from a grainy picture. His expensive suit, his watch, his slicked-back hair, all there, but his expression was hard and cold, nothing like the saintly image he had sold to the world. Dana's throat tightened as she turned the photo for the others to see. The reaction was immediate. Agents shifted uneasily, their shoulders stiff, their eyes darting to one another. No one said his name at first, as though speaking it would breathe him back into the room. When someone finally muttered Blackwood, it came like a curse. The bomb squad leader stepped back, almost as if distance from the image would protect him. Dana could see the storm forming in their eyes, because everyone knew the story. Years ago, Blackwood had been investigated, whispers of trafficking, whispers of children who disappeared after being placed in his programs, but nothing stuck. He walked free, his reputation bruised but not broken. Now here he was again, hidden inside a doll's chest, in a suitcase Shadow had found like a ghost, clawing its way out of silence. Dana's gaze dropped to the other photographs, and her stomach twisted harder. These were not just faces, they were children. Their eyes wide, their lips pressed tight, their skin pale, as if sunlight was something they had not seen in months. The background was worse. A basement, lined with concrete walls, damp stains crawling across the surface, a bare bulb casting shadows that bent in strange angles. One boy clutched a stuffed animal so tightly his knuckles had turned white. Another girl's hair fell across her eyes, but even then, Dana could see the fear written in her posture. These were not just images, they were pieces of stolen lives. Shadow pressed his nose to the photographs, his chest rising and falling in sharp breaths. His ears flicked back then, forward again, his body tense, but not in the way he reacted to bombs or drugs. This was different. He whined, pressing his paw against one photo then another, and when Dana looked at him, she understood. He wasn't just smelling paper and ink. Dogs could carry scents that lingered long after people left, and Shadow was picking up on more than traces of sweat or dirt. He was smelling fear, the heavy residue of captivity that clung to these images like smoke on clothes. Dana's eyes stung, and she blinked hard, trying to keep her focus. Around her, the crowd of travelers had grown restless, murmurs swelling louder, but the agent's silence held more weight than all of it combined. They knew what this meant. Blackwood was not a ghost after all. He was flesh and blood, still moving, still hiding behind his empire of charities. Shadow had dragged his name back into the light with nothing but a growl, and the truth no one else could sense. The photographs were gathered into evidence bags, the doll sealed away, and the suitcase lifted from the table as if closing it could erase what had already been seen. Voices overlapped in quick bursts, some calling for calm, others suggesting it was nothing more than a cruel prank meant to stir fear in a crowded station. Dana stood stiff among them, her eyes on Shadow, who had not taken his gaze from the tracks. His chest rose and fell in sharp bursts, his ears twitching with every passing sound. His leash pulled tight in her hand, as if he was trying to drag her somewhere else. An older agent muttered that people had staged things like this before, that the photos could be fake, the documents forged. Another shrugged and said Blackwood had been a ghost for years. His name a rumor more than a threat, and maybe someone thought it would be clever to stir up panic by planting his face inside a suitcase. Dana felt anger rise, but beneath it something she hated even more: doubt. She looked at Shadow, her partner, her friend, the dog who had saved her from hidden blades, from ambushes, from mistakes that could have ended her career or her life. He had never been wrong, not once. But how could he know this? How could he sense something beyond simple training? She crouched beside him, her fingers brushing the rough scar along his neck, the one she had traced on nights when sleep would not come. "Talk to me," she whispered, though she knew he already had. His pacing was frantic now, back and forth, nose darting to the air, claws scraping the tile. He kept pulling toward the tracks, his body straining as if the platform itself was hiding something just beyond their reach. One of the squad members approached her, his voice low but firm. "Look, Officer Cruz, dogs can be spooked too. Maybe he picked up some strange scent. Maybe the doll still smells of fear, like you said. But fear isn't evidence. We can't halt trains and shut down half the city on a dog's hunch." Dana bit back, the sharp words forming in her throat. She wanted to tell him Shadow was not just a dog, that he had a sense for things even machines could not measure, but the weight of every doubtful eye pressed against her. She rose to her feet and forced her voice steady. "Shadow has never given a false alert. Not once. You think this is a prank. I don't. Look at him. He knows." She hated how her own chest twisted with the possibility that they were right, that she was wrong to believe so completely. The crowd had thinned, but the platform still hummed with unease. Shadow pulled again, harder this time, toward the rails. His nails clicked against the edge as he sniffed into the dark gap where the tracks disappeared. Dana's heart pounded with each tug, torn between protocol and the unshakable truth in his eyes. Doubt clawed at her, but trust ran deeper. The shrill whistle tore through the air and made the whole station tremble with its echo. On Platform 9, the crowd shifted uneasily, passengers pulling their coats tighter, glancing nervously at the uniformed officers who still lingered near the evidence table. A long-distance freight train rumbled at the far end of the tracks, its cars lined in steel and grime, engines growling low like some restless beast waiting to be set loose. Dana felt the sound in her chest as she held Shadow's leash, still watching the agents debate what to do with the suitcase, with the photographs, with the ghost of Blackwood that had been pulled from hiding. She was about to speak when Shadow's body stiffened all over again. It happened so fast, she nearly fell. One moment, he was still pacing near her side. The next, he lunged forward with a force that shot through her arm and nearly yanked her shoulder from its socket. His bark exploded across the platform, sharp, urgent, impossible to ignore. People jumped, some covering their ears, others clutching their bags tighter. Dana stumbled after him, her boots striking sparks on the concrete, trying to hold him back. Shadow's eyes had locked on the freight train, his body low, his teeth bared, his chest vibrating with growls that felt like thunder pressed into the floor. "Shadow, heel," she commanded, her voice tight, but he didn't listen. He was no longer the obedient partner trotting through hallways on command. He was a soldier again, a tracker, a creature of instinct and purpose that no leash could truly hold. His muscles rippled beneath his dark coat, scars standing out as he pulled her closer to the rails. Dana's heart slammed against her ribs as she realized the truth he was spelling out in barks and desperate lunges. The suitcase had been a clue, but not the end. It was bait or a warning, and Shadow knew it. He wasn't finished, because the danger wasn't finished. She looked at the train, its headlights flaring as the conductor leaned from the window to signal departure. To the agents, it was just a freight car carrying cargo across states. To Shadow, it was something more, something hidden behind steel walls, something that smelled of fear. Passengers began whispering again, voices rising. Someone muttered that the dog was going crazy. An agent shouted for her to control him. But Dana ignored them all. She tightened her grip and let Shadow lead, her chest burning with the certainty that this was not chance. She had felt this pull once before overseas, when Shadow dragged her from a building seconds before it collapsed. He had been right then, and he was right now. The whistle blew again, louder, the ground trembling beneath their feet, as the train prepared to roll forward. Shadow barked once more, a sound so fierce it silenced even the doubters. Dana's breath caught as she whispered under the noise. The suitcase was just the beginning. The command to stop the train echoed across the platform, sharp and urgent, and for a moment it felt as if the entire station held its breath. The long freight cars screeched against the rails as brakes locked, sparks flying in the cold air. People who had been waiting for their own trains scattered back, fear painted across their faces as armed agents ran past, their radios crackling with clipped voices. Dana held Shadow close as he strained against the leash, his body shaking with a drive that refused to be silenced. He wasn't afraid of the noise, not the grinding wheels or the shouts. He wanted the train. Within minutes, the agents had surrounded the first cargo car. Dana climbed the metal steps with them, Shadow leaping up beside her, as if his body were made for this kind of hunt. The sliding door groaned open, heavy and reluctant, and the beam of a flashlight cut through the dark interior. Rows of wooden crates stretched down the length of the car, stacked in neat towers that smelled of damp wood, fuel, and something else beneath it all, something sour and human that made the back of Dana's throat sting. Shadow shoved past her legs and bounded forward, his nails scraping on the steel floor. He ignored most of the crates, his nose sweeping the air as he zigzagged down the narrow aisle. He barked once, loud, then twice more, before throwing his weight against a single crate shoved near the middle of the stack. His claws raked the wood, his teeth sinking into the edge, splinters snapping away as if he would tear it open himself if no one else did. "Get this one," Dana ordered, her voice steady, though her pulse thundered. The agents set to work, crowbars wedged into seams, hammers striking metal braces. Shadow did not back away. He kept clawing and biting, his growl echoing in the confined space, a sound filled with urgency. The lid cracked free at last and fell aside with a dull thud. Flashlight swung down. What lay inside made every breath falter. Piled together in a cruel heap were children's belongings. Tiny sneakers scuffed at the toes, pink backpacks with cartoon faces faded from use, stuffed animals with worn ears and button eyes, each one tagged with small white labels marked in black numbers. It looked more like an inventory than forgotten luggage. The agents recoiled, some swearing under their breath, others muttering prayers. Dana stared into the crate, her chest tightening as if the air had turned to stone. She reached in slowly and lifted a small shoe, no bigger than the palm of her hand. The tag tied to its lace read simply 47. Shadow whined low beside her, pressing his nose against the pile as if searching for the children these things once belonged to. It was no prank, no random scare. This was deliberate, organized, and cold. The suitcase had been a warning, but the train was carrying the truth. Dana's voice shook as she whispered, "This isn't cargo. This is a record." The sound was small at first, almost lost in the noise of agents shouting orders and the distant hum of the stalled freight train. But Dana heard it clearly, a sharp buzz followed by a faint vibration. Her head turned slowly, her stomach tightening as she recognized the source. The burner phone, the one pulled from the broken doll's chest. It sat in an evidence bag on the corner of the table, its black plastic surface lighting up with every pulse. For a moment no one moved. The agents glanced at one another, unsure if answering was even the right choice. Phones like that were meant for control, for threats, for poison disguised as words. Dana's throat was dry as she reached for it, sliding the bag open with stiff fingers. She lifted it to her ear, her voice trembling despite her effort to stay steady. "This is Officer Dana Cruz," she said. "Who is this?" There was no greeting, no pause, only a voice, low and mechanical, distorted by a device that stripped it of human warmth. "If you found the case," it said slowly, each word deliberate, "you're already too late." The words seemed to crawl into the air and linger like smoke. Then silence. Not even the faint hiss of static. Just nothing. Dana's heart pounded against her ribs. Her hand shook as she lowered the phone, staring at the blank screen that had already gone dark again. Agents around her muttered, some frustrated, some unnerved, but no one spoke with certainty. Too late for what? Too late for whom? The photographs, the children's belongings, Blackwood's face staring back from a hidden cache, everything twisted together in her mind until it felt like the walls of the train station were closing in. Shadow pressed against her side then, his body firm and steady where hers felt unmoored. His head nudged her leg once, twice, before he leaned his weight into her with a quiet determination. A low growl rumbled through him, not the frantic warning from earlier, but something deeper, steadier, like a vow spoken in the only language he knew. Dana looked down into his amber eyes, and for a heartbeat, it was as if he were answering the voice himself. "No, we're not too late." She crouched beside him, her hand slipping into his dark fur, grounding herself in the warmth of him. "You believe that, don't you?" she whispered. He licked her wrist once, then turned his gaze back toward the freight cars, nose flaring as if the scent of fear and suffering was still heavy in the air. Around them the agents scrambled, debating their next move, some still insisting the phone call proved the danger had already passed. Dana stood, her hand still firm on Shadow's collar. "He's wrong," she said, her voice louder now, cutting through the arguments. "We're not too late. Shadow knows it. There's more to find, more to save." No one replied at first, but no one argued either. All eyes shifted to the dog, who stood tall and unyielding, his growl fading into silence but his message clear. The fight was not over. The doll sat sealed in a clear evidence box on the table, its cracked face staring blankly as if mocking the silence of the room. Dana hadn't wanted to look at it again, but something about the weight of it kept pulling her eyes back. Shadow paced at her side, restless, his tail rigid, his ears pricked forward every time the doll shifted inside the plastic. Finally, with a quiet curse under her breath, Dana opened the container and lifted the toy out. Its porcelain was cold and chipped, its dress stiff with dirt. She turned it over in her hands and felt something odd along the seam of its back. Her fingers slid into a small tear in the cloth. She tugged gently, and a piece of folded paper slipped free, tucked so tightly that it had nearly been missed. The paper was yellowed and soft from age, smudged at the corners as though handled too many times. She unfolded it carefully, the crease marks splitting under her touch. Lines stretched across the page, thin and faded, forming paths beneath the city. It was a map, not of the train system above, but of the forgotten tunnels buried under Oakridge, tunnels long sealed off, and spoken of only in old construction records. For a moment, the room was silent, the agents leaning in with frowns etched across their faces. Dana's pulse quickened. The map was marked with red ink, notations in the margins, and several bold X's scrawled along the longest stretch. At the center of it, written in a cramped hand, were two words that made her skin prickle: holding site. Shadow pressed forward then, his nose lowering to the map, nostrils flaring as if the ink itself carried scent. He moved along the paper, his muzzle tracing the lines as though he understood what lay beneath them. When he reached one of the X's, his paw came down hard, pressing against the paper with a sharp scratch of nails. He looked up at Dana, eyes burning with that same urgency she had seen on the platform. The agents murmured among themselves, some skeptical, others shaken. An older man muttered that the tunnels were unsafe, that they had been abandoned for a reason, that even if the map was real, there was no telling what they would find. Dana's voice cut through the noise, sharper than she intended. "Shadow's telling us this is where we go. You've seen him. You've seen what he's found already. We can't turn away now." Her words hung heavy in the air. She saw doubt in their eyes, but also the weight of truth they could no longer ignore. Shadow pawed the map again, whining low, his body tense as if he were already running ahead into the darkness. Dana drew a breath and gave the order that sealed it. "We follow the dog." The team gathered gear, weapons checked, flashlights loaded, radios crackling with new directives. Shadow stood at the head of the group, muscles coiled, ready. His nose lifted to the air, catching scents no one else could, and he pulled forward with steady determination. Beneath Oakridge, the tunnels waited, and Shadow was already leading them in. The air in the tunnels was thick with dampness and rot, a suffocating mixture of mold, old oil, and something heavier that seemed to cling to skin and clothes. Each step sent echoes racing down the dark corridors, their flashlights cutting thin beams of light through layers of dust and cobwebs. Water dripped steadily from overhead pipes, the sound rhythmic and hollow, like a slow heartbeat buried deep underground. Dana pulled her jacket tighter and forced her breathing steady, but nothing could hide the weight pressing on her chest. Shadow was ahead, his paws splashing lightly in shallow puddles, his body taut with energy, his nose low to the ground and flaring with every inhale. He was not waiting for commands. He was pulling them forward, faster than the agents wanted to go, his nails scraping against the concrete as he zigzagged, catching scents that none of them could understand. His growls began as faint rumbles, rising with each turn, until the noise filled the space like thunder trapped between the walls. Dana called his name more than once, her voice bouncing back at her from the dark, but he did not slow. He was moving like a creature possessed, as though he was chasing something that lived only in his memory. The agents struggled to keep pace. Their boots clanged on the old metal grates, their breath harsh in the tight air. Radios hissed with updates no one had time to answer. One muttered that the tunnels had been sealed for decades. Another asked if they were sure this wasn't a dead end. But their words carried no conviction. Shadow's urgency was enough to drown out their doubt. He wasn't just searching. He was following something real, something that made his entire frame quiver with purpose. They turned a corner where the concrete walls narrowed and the darkness seemed to close tighter. Shadow barked once, the sound sharp and furious, then darted left into a low passage where the air grew colder. Dana's lungs burned as she pushed herself harder, her flashlight jerking with each stride. Her heart hammered with the knowledge that Shadow had never led them wrong, and tonight was no different. Then, all at once, he stopped. His body froze mid-step, ears pricked forward, tail stiff, nose pressed toward a rusted steel door set crookedly in the wall. The hinges were corroded, streaked with years of water damage, but it was clear this door had been used recently. The smell hit Dana before she even reached him, a wave of damp concrete mixed with sweat and fear, so strong it made her stomach turn. Shadow pressed his muzzle against the gap at the bottom, inhaling so deeply his chest heaved. A low growl rolled from him, steady and unyielding, a sound that filled every corner of the tunnel. Dana knelt beside him, one hand on his shoulder, feeling the tremors in his muscles. His body told her what his voice could not. The trail ended here. Behind this door was the reason he had dragged them through the tunnels. Behind it was the truth that everyone else had tried to deny. The steel door resisted every strike, the rust groaning with each blow as if it meant to keep its secrets buried forever. Agents worked in silence, their jaws clenched, sweat rolling down faces lit only by flickering beams of light. Shadow pressed against the door the entire time, his nails scraping the concrete, his growl steady and low, filling the tunnel like a drumbeat that would not stop. Dana's heart raced as she watched him, her hand trembling on the leash, knowing without doubt that whatever lay on the other side was why they had been dragged into this darkness. At last the hinges gave way with a screech that set every nerve on edge. The door swung inward, its weight crashing against the wall, and the air that spilled out was worse than anything they had smelled before. It was thick with sweat, mold, and the faint copper tang of fear itself. Flashlights sliced through the gloom, and then the agents froze, their breath catching all at once. Rows of cages stretched into the shadows, crude metal boxes stacked side by side. Inside were children. They sat huddled against the bars, some too weak to lift their heads, others blinking painfully against the sudden burst of light. Their faces were pale, hollow, their clothes dirty and torn. For a long moment no one moved. No one spoke. It was as if the entire world had shrunk down to this single tunnel where innocence had been trapped and forgotten. Dana felt her knees weaken as she took in the sight. Shadow broke the silence. His growl melted into a high-pitched whine, filled with something almost human, something aching and desperate. He pressed his nose through the first cage, pushing until the metal rattled. A tiny hand reached back, trembling but certain, brushing against his fur. Another followed, and then another, small fingers pressing against his muzzle, as if clinging to the only warmth they could trust. Shadow stayed still, his chest heaving, eyes soft and glistening in the thin beam of the flashlight. Dana swallowed hard, her vision blurring. She crouched beside him, one hand on his back, the other covering her mouth, to stop the sob that threatened to escape. Around her the agents lowered their weapons, the metallic clicks of safeties being switched off, sounding almost like an apology. No one had words to meet what they were seeing. The only sound was the children's breathing, thin and fragile, and the faint whimpers that rose as if they weren't sure if this was rescue or another trick. "It's all right," Dana whispered, her voice breaking as she reached toward the bars. "You're safe now. We're here." But it wasn't her words that calmed them. It was Shadow. His steady presence, his unshakable whine, his head pressed through the cage as far as it would go. The children leaned closer, their hands clutching at his fur, holding onto him like a lifeline. The agents moved then, cutting locks, tearing chains, calling for medical teams over the radios. But Dana barely noticed. Her whole world had narrowed to the children reaching out for Shadow, and the dog who had refused to let silence win. The Oakridge train station no longer sounded the same. The familiar clang of luggage wheels and the sharp echo of announcements still filled the air. But there was a different tone woven into it now, a kind of reverence that softened the noise. People no longer rushed past without looking. They slowed, their eyes lifting toward the wide mural painted across the far wall. Bright colors stretched over the once blank concrete, showing the scarred black shepherd standing tall, his amber eyes fierce, his body painted as if caught mid-step. Around him were children, drawn with tender detail, their hands resting on his leash, their small faces lifted in gratitude. Beneath the mural was a single line of words that seemed to quiet everyone who passed. "He smelled what we could not. He gave the lost their voice." Dana stood before it, her uniform pressed, her eyes heavy with the memories of the tunnels, of cages rattling in the dark, of little hands reaching through the bars for a dog who refused to give up. Shadow sat beside her, chest broad, ears sharp, though he carried the weariness of what he had endured in every scar along his body. Strangers stopped to take pictures, some knelt to pat his head, others whispered soft words of thanks. He did not bark or growl. He simply watched, steady and calm, as if he understood the moment belonged to something larger than himself. Children who had been rescued came with their families, some still shy, their voices quiet, but their smiles blooming when they saw him. A small boy in a patched jacket pressed a stuffed animal into Shadow's paws, whispering that it was for him now. A girl hugged his neck without hesitation, her tiny arms clinging to him until her parents gently pulled her back. Each time, Shadow lowered his head, accepting their touch, his tail swaying just enough to show the trust he carried for them. Dana knelt beside him, resting a hand on his back. Her throat tightened as she leaned closer, her words meant for him alone. "You didn't just stop a train," she whispered, her voice steady even as her eyes burned. "You stopped silence." Shadow turned his head slightly, his nose brushing her sleeve, and for a moment it felt like he understood every word. Behind them, the station carried on. The whistle of arriving trains, the rush of footsteps, the chatter of families reuniting. But each sound seemed lighter now, touched by the truth that had been uncovered. The fear that once hung over Oakridge had lifted, replaced by pride in a dog who had smelled what no one else could, who had dragged them all from doubt into the light. As the evening sun poured through the high windows and lit the mural in gold, Dana rose and walked forward with Shadow at her side. Together, they stepped into the hum of the station, not just officer and K9 but partners who had rewritten the story of a place. He had given back voices that had almost been lost forever. And now, even in silence, Shadow spoke louder than anyone else ever could. Thank you for watching this video of a dog's devotion. If you like this story, show your support with a like. And join us by subscribing for more inspiring stories like this one.